While the United States of America has been polio-free since 1979, the disease had devastating effects on those unfortunate enough to contract it before the vaccine was discovered in the 1950s. One of the more severe-sounding treatments available was a staycation in a medical contraption called the iron lung. Daunting as it might sound, occupants in the lung described the experience as, mostly okay. Today, we're looking at what it was like to be in an iron lung. But before we do, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know what archaic technology you would like to hear about. Now breathe deeply, we're going in. Polio weakens the nervous system, and while many exposed to the virus experience no symptoms, there are the unfortunate others who experience fever, stomach upset, and pain. Extremely rare cases of polio, however, that target the spine and brainstem can lead to the real nasty stuff: numbness, stiffness, and even paralysis. A vaccine for the malady developed in the 1950s by Jonas Salk eradicated most cases of polio in our modern era. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, few treatments were available for people affected with the disease. Today, only 3 countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria, have never stopped transmission of polio. The urban growth of the post-industrial revolution led to an outbreak of polio, with reports of 10,000 cases a year, thousands of which proved fatal. The disease seemed to hit babies, children, and the elderly the hardest, and doctors were left with few options on how to help victims of the disease breathe once the virus had paralyzed their chests and abdomens. Enter Harvard University researchers Philip Drinker and Louis Agassiz Shaw Jr. The two developed a device to keep victims of polio breathing long enough to recover. The tanker respirator was made using things typically found around the house: an electronic motor, vacuum cleaners, and a sealed iron box. It's like a sous vide, but for miraculous medical devices that could save thousands. The negative pressure device forced the patient's lungs to take in air whether the polio virus liked it or not. So was it as terrible as it sounds, the iron lung? Well... In 1930, Popular Mechanic magazine described the process of being entered into an iron lung. The patient is placed on the sliding bed, shoved into the cabinet, and the shield tightly locked. A rubber collar, which fits so snugly that almost no air can pass, is adjusted around the patient's neck. A switch is turned on, and the cabinet begins to work. Claustrophobia just kicked in for half our viewers just now. Keep in mind, patients entering an iron lung were normally too sick to be extra choosy about their living quarters, but testimonials from polio survivors made the experience sound like, "Hey, I survived polio." Michael Barr, iron lung resident during the 1970s, said, "The relief of not having a respirator on my mouth and just lying flat on my back with the breathing taking over was quite relaxing. It was restful because there wasn't much for you to do in the iron lung. You would normally just shut your eyes and go to sleep." Victims of polio who were confined to an iron lung were determined to live full lives despite living in a tin can hug. Take Martha Mason, author of Breathe, A Lifetime in the Rhythm of an Iron Lung. She went to college, hosted dinner parties, read more books than you or me. After getting online in the mid-90s, made countless friends despite being reliant on a breathing machine. She didn't let that deter her from living a very full life. Neither did Paul Alexander, who told CBC Radio he adapted his lifestyle to the iron lung or could make the iron lung adapt to his desires. Alexander talked that talk and graduated from law school. Being confined to an iron lung didn't stop people from living full lives, mainly because you weren't necessarily confined to anything. The medical device was meant as a stop-in for patients having difficulty breathing after paralysis of the upper body due to polio. Typically, a stay in an iron lung was a brisk 2 weeks, allowing the body ample time to recover fully from the disease. The iron lung could be revisited on a need-to-use basis indefinitely in more severe cases where breathing was hindered permanently or after complications from post-polio syndrome. And yes, a very small handful still do to this day. Our buddy attorney Paul Alexander took his iron lung with him to college. It became like a party trick to him. Paul gained tons of friends who all wanted to find out what the deal was with the guy with his head sticking out of a machine. Drinker and Shaw tested out their life-saving medical device initially on our world's most precious creatures, the common house cat, but soon they needed to test the device on human subjects. In 1928, they used their device to help an 8-year-old girl suffering from infantile paralysis at Children's Hospital in Boston. After just a few minutes, she was able to breathe using the machine. John Emerson then invented a lighter, more efficient version of the lung that was soon available in major cities with children's hospitals like Philly and Chicago, where entire rooms were devoted to house iron lungs in order to treat multiple patients at once. With most great inventions come inevitable improvements and drama, and the iron lung was no exception. In 1931, John Emerson, an inventor from Cambridge, Massachusetts, improved upon the bed of the device, lovingly referred to as the cookie tray, and spruced up the place by adding little windows to the sides of its fuselage. He also cut the cost of the machine by half and lightened it significantly as well, for good measure. Basically, he was Justin Timberlake in the social network telling fake Mark Zuckerberg to drop the V in the Facebook.com. But Drinker didn't see it that way and sued him for improving on his design like a jerk. Emerson argued that Drinker shouldn't have been allowed a patent on something that could save human lives. He also claimed to have worked on the design before the patent was received by Drinker in 1931, and furthermore said the technology predated the Harvard researchers, so technically Drinker couldn't maintain rights over individual components of the machine. And then Drinker was probably all, "If you were the inventor of the iron lung, you would have invented the iron lung," all smug. Emerson made a better case and in the end, won, nullifying Drinker's patent and becoming the gold standard of lung model design moving forward. When Drinker brought the iron lung onto the market, he charged about $3,600. The price was eventually lowered once Emerson pounced and brought a cheaper, better design into the fold, but even then, he was charging $1,500 and took royalties on each one sold. Emerson's sleeker design was still pretty pricey, costing a chunky $1,000 per machine, pricing out the plebeians and causing most iron lungs to land, understandably, in hospitals. The 1930s were notoriously not the greatest time to be alive in America, and after massive unemployment, very few could afford the device during the Great Depression. Eventually, Franklin D. Roosevelt founded the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, renamed in 1938 to the March of Dimes. Yes, that March of Dimes. And that organization took the lead in helping those suffering with polio to pay for the medical care they needed to survive, including access to the iron lung. As more and more people spent time in the lung, more and more people came up with unique ways to pass and enjoy the time. Some installed mirrors into the device to keep up with the world around them. Gary Presley, who contracted polio at the age of 17, paired his mirror with a television, which he claimed it taught him how to read in reverse. Presley, along with polio survivor Marshall Barr, also had frames installed above the head to hold books and other reading materials, though Barr didn't much see the advantage since pages still had to be turned somehow without arms. Author Mark O'Brien found a way around this. He used a foot-long stick to communicate, turn pages, move nearby tables, and all the fun stuff you do to pass the time. A foot-long stick can't help you put a foot-long sub in your mouth, however, so lung living meant relying on others for basic everyday needs like eating food or changing clothes. Since the head is exposed, you can eat in a lung, but swallowing can be a bit tricky, as Marshall Barr pointed out. Since a person was flat on their back, they really needed to be careful when swallowing. Swallow in rhythm with the machine because it's pulling on the diaphragm and then pushing it out again. Patients had to wait until the iron lung breathed out to swallow. Sounds methodical. Jim Costello remembers the process and the attendants who changed his clothes less than fondly. Changing my pajamas or the sheets was carried out by a team of nurses who had everything prepared beforehand. They would work very quickly to do what was necessary, monitoring me carefully. It would take a number of sessions of opening the lung and pulling my stretcher bed in and out to get the task done. It was a nightmare. Gary Presley had a different experience with food and morale in the lung, figuring if living required being locked in a metal tube, maybe living wasn't for him. With his body deteriorating and an overall decline in physical activity, he didn't want to eat. According to his own testimonial in his book, 7 Wheelchairs, A Life Beyond Polio. Canned in the iron lung, I had become a withering, wasting mass of insecurities, apprehensions, and depression. The desiccated body housed in the great machine needed minimum fuel, and minimum fuel produces little waste. I don't remember refusing to eat, I simply didn't care. I remember spoons pressed against my lip, but I did not take them. I was not hungry. Patients had to learn how to rely on others to tend to the most basic of human needs. Arms were confined inside a chamber that worked mostly by remaining nice and sealed. Opening the portal windows along the sides to move an arm and a leg or apply hot packs to an achy body could lead to respiratory distress. Patients had to be helped to use the bathroom. Sounds like a great experience overall for everyone involved. Earlier, when we mentioned attorney at law Paul Alexander hauling his iron lung into his dorm room, we probably should have mentioned that these bad boys weighed hundreds of pounds. Not exactly the most convenient thing to rely on to live. These life-saving metal miracles, comprised of tubes, motors, and metal, weighed up to 800 pounds. The size and scope of this guy made things tricky in portability and accessibility and contributed to the stigma of being treated by one. When Peg Carrot thought about her life in an iron lung after getting polio in her youth, she burst into tears at the thought of living in the device she called a gray octopus ready to swallow me at any moment. Understandable, I think we'd all burst into tears at the prospect of being eaten alive by a giant sea creature. For others, though, like Larry Alexander, he welcomed his new overlord, the iron lung. He saw his new living quarters as, sure, monstrous, but also as angels of salvation. The weight of the iron lung was nothing compared to the unbearable weight of his chest he felt before being put in the machine. Over time, the iron lung was reworked with new technology that allowed for a sleeker and cheaper design. Since the iron lung was a negative pressure ventilator, meaning it works by lowering pressure around the lung cells, it required bulky, clunky machine designs. Positive pressure ventilators, however, raise the pressure in the airwaves, which can be accomplished with much more compact tubes and nasal or facial masks. The 1950s and 60s brought changes to our nation as a whole, but also to the lung. Negative pressure machines were whittled down to be less bulky and more like body armor or jackets. Positive pressure technology also led to greater use of face masks. Once polio vaccines lowered the number of cases substantially, the demand for the iron lung decreased along with it. 1,200 people in the United States were using iron lungs in 1959 compared to 39 in 2004 and perhaps as little as 3 people by 2017. People still experiencing complications from polio still find the negative pressure machine to work best for them, even though parts for the lung are becoming increasingly rare. Parts for mostly antiquated medical devices aren't easily found on eBay. So how do you feel about the iron lung? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.